Yeah, but you know, I want to see the notes, so you can see the
No,
next slide.
it's not possible.
Oh, it's not
because,
possible.
no,
Okay,
no.
okay.
Because it's the copy of the main.
Ah, it's a mirror.
Yeah.
Okay. No, it's okay. Yeah, it's okay. I'll try and use my head.
You remember?
Yeah. We'll see. Yeah, that's it. Hello, everyone. Hey, nice to see familiar faces. Thank you for taking time out to come to today's presentation. I know if your day yesterday was anything like mine, it's been a really busy show and there's so much to see. So I appreciate you all coming to spend a little bit of time this morning talking about fragrance trends from Fragrances of the World. If you don't know me, my name is Clayton. I'm the Evaluation and Communications Manager at Fragrances of the World, working with Michael Edwards. If you're not familiar with Michael's work, he's a fragrance taxonomist, a historian and founding editor. He was the creator of the Fragrance Wheel. He's author of Perfume Legends and American Legends. And together with our team, we've matched over 55,000 fragrances, family by family, note by note. And last year, we celebrated 40 years of Fragrances of the World. A couple of projects that Michael is well known for, some essential reading. So last year, he traveled the world with American Legends, which was the follow-up to Perfume Legends, which was, discussing and talking about iconic French perfumery. Now we have the counterpart for that, which is American Legends, which is talking about historic American fragrances that have changed the face of perfumery, both in the West and around the world. A little bit more about the work that we do. So this is more talking to the work that I do and our evaluation team. We have our database, which is a professional resource, which is a subscriber-based database with information on over 55,000 fragrances. We also use that data that feeds through to provision of API products. So this is things like Wikiparfum. If you're familiar with Wikiparfum, the data coming from our database feeds the site. We also have retailer applications. So part of the reason why we're so passionate about classifying all of these fragrances is that Michael Edwards has also written an algorithm which allows retailers to provide immediate recommendations of fragrances that their customers should try based on their olfactive preferences. So that's a little bit about what we do. In my work in evaluation with Erica Moore, who is our head of evaluation, we're traveling the world. We're smelling as much as we can and classifying everything. So that allows us to provide some data, which is the insights that we're going to present to you today. So some insights that we picked up on 2024. We tracked over 3,300 new fragrance launches last year. It was, relatively speaking, it's a flat year. So there wasn't a lot of growth within the industry. Interesting that niche is down by 1%. However, it's making up 46% of total launches around the world. So you can really see the importance of niche and the importance of events like Essence. I guess brands that have a lot of financial weight behind them, so we're talking about prestige brands and luxury brands, showed a lot of growth. So there's 22% growth in the prestige market and 67% growth in the luxury fragrance market. So although it's a small section of the industry, holding a 3% share, it is a significant part of how it's shaping perfumery and the trends that we're seeing. If we look at the breakdown by olfactive family, and this is using Michael Edwards' wheel, again, we find that if we track everything year on year, a lot of these trends take a little while to really establish and to take foot. That can be for a number of reasons, particularly with things like raw materials. It takes producers a number of years to cultivate new ingredients that are going to change olfactive families and trends. But one thing that we did pick up last year, which was quite interesting, was the cannibalization of woody amber fragrances. Particularly in niche, we've had a lot of interest in things like oud, so agar wood, dry amber notes. This has really been driving a lot of niche fragrances over the last sort of decade. And what we're finding is that it's really switched. So we're seeing a lot of more amber fragrances and fragrances in the amber family, and also soft amber, which in our language is categorized by amber plus things like incense and resins. We saw a small growth in woods and dry woods, so dry woods meaning leather, smoky, woody fragrances, and an increase in citrus and soft floral fragrances. I'll talk a little bit about the soft floral category because that's a trend that we're seeing. Citrus for me is something that I'm keeping my eye on because I'm noticing there is a growth in citrus fragrances. It's just starting. It may not be something that we really see evolve, but it's something that I have my eye on. And also as a color, I think yellow is interesting, and if you go through the fair, it's sort of, if we look at sort of color theory and colors that are really popping, I think yellows and reds are definitely, you'll see a lot of that at the show outside. So some market trends that we picked up last year. Straight to the point. Everyone's talking about the cost of living crisis. So one way that perfume brands, I think, are responding to these consumer concerns is this perception of value. So the higher the concentration, the higher the value the product delivers. We talk about elegant beast mode. Beast mode being a trend that we've seen particularly in things like TikTok, where it was sort of more of a younger, particularly male consumer that was really interested in long-lasting fragrances. But as you see from the examples on the page, a lot of these brands are sort of high-end niche and there's an elegance to them. So we're talking about a more elegant approach to this longevity trend that we saw over the last 5 years. So there's really a battle of concentration with some brands actually putting the concentration level on their packaging. And then another thing that we noticed was that brands were releasing extrait versions of their bestsellers. Interesting in that last year with the niche numbers being quite flat, speaking earlier, that we find that niche brands have been quite cautious in the last 12 months. So for them, it's really about, I guess, using their bestsellers, things that they know popular with their consumer, but giving them a twist and giving them something novel to experience, and that's through this concentration rise. Liquid emotion, this was something else that we picked up, and if you look at niche historically, where niche came from, a lot of the storytelling behind niche was about heritage, it was about craftsmanship, the storytelling was sort of long form. But what we're finding is that perfume press adapting to a younger generation of consumers, particularly TikTokers, and so it's really about imagery, narratives that really are short, bite-sized, and that can really pop. And this is what we've seen through these emotion-led fragrances that are being launched, rather than these sort of long-form narratives. Particularly younger generations of consumers are much more talking about how a fragrance makes them feel rather than buying into this sort of story behind the fragrance. And I think you can see this as well with a lot of the viral fragrances. If we think of sort of the classics like Baccarat Rouge, Aventus, all of these fragrances, they sort of take on a life of their own once they reach the sort of viral stage. So I think if you were to ask a lot of the consumers that wear these products what the story behind the fragrance was, I don't know that many of them would be able to tell you. It's sort of really actually about how the fragrance has made them feel that has sort of led to the popularity, and also within the communities, how they share what they're wearing, what they're enjoying. They're much more influenced by their peers rather than the story that's coming from the brand. We talk about blurred lines as well. So Niche has adopted marketing and distribution strategies, which typically we've found in things like prestige fragrances or more broader distribution brands. It was the first time for me that I saw a niche brand which has evolved and using techniques like having a celebrity as the face of the fragrance, where typically Niche has always been about the juice and the story behind the fragrance. It was the first time we've seen a face of in this sort of more of a prestige style of marketing campaign. And then that sort of leads to the question, does the term niche matter in 2025? We're seeing a new generation of fragrance consumers who, if you talk to particularly young people, young guys and girls that are in their sort of early teens, a lot of them, if you ask them for their favorite fragrances, they're not all niche. They're really interested in exploring everything. So then that has sort of really blurred the lines of how consumers are interacting with fragrances and these sort of distribution channels that we've imposed on the way they experience fragrance. Another thing that we've noticed as well is as niche brands evolve and grow, they need to expand their teams, and a lot of the recruitment is coming from larger groups. So you might have a small niche brand that has grown, and then they're looking at recruiting, say, marketing skills or PR skills from people that have experience working with bigger brands. So we're seeing this sort of blurred expertise even within the brands as they evolve. So some olfactory trends that we've picked up last year, which we think will continue through this year. So molten amber or amber. So we're seeing a lot of classic amberine accords paired with resins, incense, vanilla, and tonka bean. It was interesting in our data, so niche woody amber fragrances are down 6% compared to last year. So niche amber and soft amber fragrances are both up 2%. So there's sort of really been this replacement of amber being the new, I would say, oud. So some trending notes that you'll probably see if you're outside. So a lot of ambergris, vanilla, tonka bean, myrrh, pyrogenated incense and labdanum, benzoin, styrax, and balsams. And if we're looking at, I guess, going back to the history behind these accords, so we have things like Amber Antique from Coty from 1905. So it was really the first amber fragrance. We're thinking of like Delaire and the amber base from Delaire. So these things have always been around, and continuing through things like Shalimar, these sort of really amberine-based ambery notes have sort of come and gone. But we're really noticing an increase in the last 12 months. Even if we think of a brand like Creed, who had made a lot of noise in the market last year. So they talked about having the universe of amber, which they launched with 2 fragrances. So I encourage you, if you're outside, some fragrances that you might like as examples of this trend. So Welton London yesterday launched Umbra Innamorata, and this was a Vincent Records fragrance that he developed, and he really wanted to marry this idea of amber, so this amberine, labdanum, Mediterranean resins with ambergris, so ambroxan and these sort of more salty, beachy notes. It's this idea of this union between the 2 types of ambers. So this is the new fragrance that you can see outside. Or if you're passing Atelier Materi, we have Ombre Papier, or Aubigant has Ombre Rubis. So very unique styles of amber, but all amber nonetheless. Another trend that we picked up is this sort of idea of nostalgic musks. When we talk about fragrance trends, and if you were here last year when I was speaking, we notice that there's not really a new trend which just sort of comes out of anywhere. Most of these trends are continuations and sort of blurring of trends that existed before. So one of the things that we noticed when we were going through COVID lockdowns, that people wanted these sort of nostalgic, soft, comforting scents. And so this is really where musk came into play. Now we're sort of getting this almost intersection of other trends. So another trend being long-lasting fragrances. So you can either do that through the sort of the amber route of sort of very intense ambery fragrances, or if you're wanting a soft, more sort of skin scent, but it's long-lasting, we're finding that the musk is a category of ingredients that perfumers are using to express this thought. So often paired with things like aldehydes and orris, also ambery notes. So musk is back. There's a little bit of a retro vibe to it as well, if you remember Jovan Musk from the 70s, or even the Body Shop's white musk from the 80s. We're seeing, you've got all of these various shades of musk. So trending ingredients are things like amberette seed, powdery amber musk accords, mucinone, sure, for this sort of powdery retro feel of musk. White musk accord, so Havetalide, so more of a fruity, soft, clean musk. Or we have woody musk accord, so Cashmeran or Cashmere Woods, which is very popular as well. So tracking this back to its origin, sure, we can talk about Jovan Musk. This was a chapter dedicated to this fragrance in Michael Edwards' American Legends. And you really sort of see, I guess, the evolution and how in the 1970s, this idea of like hippies coming out of the 60s were really interested in these skin scents that made them feel very sensual. And this is sort of, we're seeing this resurgence of sensuality through fragrance as well now in 2025. If you'd like to see some examples of these fragrances out at Essence, O-Top, again, this is a new launch that they just launched yesterday. So Musk d'Hiver. So this was speaking with Romeo, one of the founders of the brand. He really liked this idea of how when you're walking out, and he's from Korea, so in the winter, this idea of like the coolness of winter hitting your skin, and so how that makes the skin scent itself in that climate. So this is his interpretation of that. Also, Premier Note has Grey Musk, which launched last year, and also Born to Stand Out, which had a lot of interest yesterday. You saw their bags. If you were here yesterday, you would have seen them everywhere. So Filthy Musk is a really interesting interpretation of the more animalic side of musky notes. The new gourmand. So this is a really interesting trend that we picked up. So previous gourmand notes were really based on European confectionery, so they're very sugary, very sweet, lots of notes of caramel, chocolate, and praline. The new gourmand for us is less sugary. It's often drawing inspiration from North and South Asian confectionery. You'll see trending notes of things like sesame, dried fruits, basmati rice, pandan leaf, matcha, coconut, nutty notes, so a lot of pyrazines as well, cereal or pastry notes, and lactonic milk notes. And adding to this, it's a slight deviation, but still related to this trend. Last year we reported on this rise of tropical or exotic fruity notes. We're still seeing that through the marketplace. So things like mango, guava, lychee, all of these exotic fruits are still there. It was something interesting for us and links to this idea of more of a accessible and fun way to express niche fragrances. So often when these fruity notes are used, they're still paired with very sophisticated either leather or saffron or oud or ambery notes, but there's sort of this playful, fun, fruity cocktail that goes on in the top. Tracking this trend back, of course, we have to remember Angel from Mugler in 1992. It was really, I guess, a shift for us, and also this idea of longevity. It was expressed as an eau de parfum, where typically everything was eau de toilette, but it was really this idea of candy floss and fun and being at the fair. Of course, Olivia Cresp was the perfumer here. And this is, again, an excerpt from Michael Edwards' Perfume Legends 2. And if you're out in the fair and you want to see some examples of this trend in play, Electimus, this was their launch from yesterday, so Moroccan Medjool. It's an idea of a very ambery fragrance with a lot of citrus notes, so it's quite fresh, but it has this medjool date accord, which is a key theme of the fragrance. Or Sarah Baker, Rococo Pie. It's really like eating a hot apple pie. Or Baruti as well, so Mono no Aware, which is a Japanese-inspired theme. So there's notes of matcha, so it's a green, woody scent, but has a slight sort of powdery gourmand facet to it as well. During COVID, something that we thought was really interesting is how perfume brands sort of pivoted to give consumers who are in lockdown a feeling of how they could be in nature. So we saw a rise in green notes in perfumery. But this has sort of evolved over time, and what we're seeing now is that we're sort of, instead of being in the canopy of the forest, we're sort of now on the forest floor. So we're seeing a lot of notes that are sort of really imbibing this idea of like vegetal, mossy notes, wet stone, and also a few things that are talking about gardening. So being in the garden, getting your hands into the soil, making vegetable patches. So we're seeing trending notes of mosses, of course petrichor, earthy notes, a lot of mushroom as well, beetroot, and green foliage. Tracking this back to its origins, if everyone remembers the Demeter Fragrance Library, this is a release of Dirt from 1996. It was quite a pivotal fragrance at the time because Christopher Brosius, who was behind the brand, was really trying to buck the system and move away from this idea of how prestige fragrances were ruling perfumery. So again, one of the founding niche brands that really changed people's perspectives and was sort of really about storytelling rather than a classic sort of prestige fragrance that's led by a supermodel or a celebrity. And if you remember this fragrance, it really is the smell of wet earth. It's like dirt, hence the name. If you're out in Essence and you want to try some fragrances that have these notes, Boho Boko has Polish potatoes, and then Source Adage, Chile, which they launched at PT Fragranze last year, and this is a really beautiful, earthy but wearable quality to it. And then from Australia we have Medicent, and this is Snow Gum, which has sort of like a mushroom petrichor over a white floral fragrance base. So to finish the presentation, I guess one of the questions, seeing the trends, something that we're always asking ourselves, and this is something that we discussed last year at Essence, was what does it mean to be niche? So being niche in 2025, we have never really come up with a clean definition of this category of fragrances, although we're now in the 15th year of Essence, which is very interesting. I remember a fragrance conversation that I had with Pierre Dinon, who is one of Michael Edwards' best friends in Paris, and they've shared a studio together for the last 20 years. And so Pierre, he's a wonderful and iconic bottle designer. If you've worn Opium, a lot of the Calvin Klein fragrances, he was the bottle designer behind these iconic fragrances. So he's very visual, and so he drew me a picture and he said, if you want to be a successful brand, you need to have the 5 cherries. And he described this like, if you go to the casino and you're playing the slot machines, the cherries line up. So if you get all the 5 cherries, you have a successful fragrance brand. And for him, those 5 cherries were finance, distribution, marketing, the bottle, and the juice. So what does that mean for niche? This comes with a lot of challenges, as well as sometimes niche can do things in a more agile way because of the size of the companies. But finance, for me, it's discussing with the brands. One of the challenges is that you have these multiple points on the financial ladder. It's never a case of a brand becoming or into being, it's independent, and then all of a sudden it's bought by a Kering or a L'Oreal. The brand has probably gone through multiple points on a ladder where they've attracted financial investment. But the challenge then is, how do you balance creativity with growth, and how do you maintain your soul as a brand when you have financial injections where those financial people have some say in how your company evolves? If we look at the second cherry, so distribution, so this is balancing accessibility with exclusivity. As a niche brand, niche has always been about being a small part of a bigger whole. And so brands, the challenge for them is how do they get their brand out there and how do they grow, but not growing too fast that things become out of control and they lose the sense of exclusivity, which is sort of one of the hallmarks of niche. And then building strength as a brand. If you're too out there, then how do you really focus on your audience and build really strong brand loyalty in the markets that you have? Number 3, marketing. Some of the conversations that we've been having with brands lately is really around community and the importance of community for a niche brand. And so this is really for the brand to have a strong sense of who they are and what they stand for, but also how do they connect with their consumers. So it's not just an exchange of a product, but actually they have a community that they're building, and there's dialogue between the consumer and the brand. And then having a unique perspective. So this is something I'm always interested in when I see a new niche brand, is asking, what is the difference? Here we have over 300 brands outside. So as you go through, sort of asking yourself, why is this one different from the other 300 that are lined up? This is always a really interesting litmus test to ask yourself. And then the bottle, obviously as a small independent niche company, if you're starting, this can be a challenge because you're wanting to have uniqueness, but you're on a budget. So often niche brands, they start with a stock bottle, and then the goal is to then eventually have a custom bottle that they can, or a custom mold that they can use. So for niche brands, I see the ones that do it well, they sort of have a plan how they're going to scale. So they might start with the design, but eventually they know how they're going to progress and move to a more customized presentation. That could be through their packaging or through their bottle as well. And then finally the juice, which is really niche, has always been about the juice. So the uniqueness, how do you create that uniqueness on a budget? Obviously with the oil houses and the perfumers that are working for these oil houses, there's no secret, but the idea of an oil house is that they're there to produce raw material and sell raw material. So as a small brand trying to get the attention of a perfumer to give you their best ideas, to give you access to a different palette, this can be a challenge for a lot of small brands. And this is sort of, really the power of a great perfume for niche is in the juice. So, on that note, I kind of want to challenge you as you're going out into Essence to think about those 5 cherries, and as you're smelling, kind of think, I guess, are there any brands, and this is a question we are often asked, like what did we see that was interesting? So for you, I think that can give you a framework as you're going through and smelling all the different brands. Are there any brands that you smell out there that have the 5 cherries? I know we've got a little bit of time for Q&A, but I actually really, looking at the audience, there's so much experience and skill and expertise in these seats. So I'm happy to take questions, but also if you have a comment or you want to add to what we've talked about, please feel free. But we have some roaming mics, so does anyone have a question to start off with? Rauya, hello. Yeah. Oh, there's a mic coming.
Thank you. Thank you so much. That was super interesting. One question for me. You mentioned there are about 300 brands walking out there. We don't know how many will survive until next year, how many won't. So genuine question there. Do you think there is still room for new niche perfumery brands? And why?
Oh, I do, yes. It's... it's a little bit of a crass analogy, but it's a bit like a horse race, right? Where everyone's in the race, or maybe, let's use another analogy, it's like a marathon. Everyone's running, and sort of as you're watching all the runners, you kind of are waiting for the one that's going to get ahead in the crowd. So I think even though there's so much in terms of brands and there's so much noise out there, and not just out there, but in the world, I think there is a real opportunity for if it's done well, and it has the 5 cherries, there's absolutely room. I think the other thing that we're tracking as well is that, historically a lot of our travels as a team has been through America, it's been through Europe, but in terms of launches, they're not only vertical, but they're also horizontal. And so we're seeing a lot of brands that are emerging from different parts of the world that we, typically wouldn't expect fragrance to come from. And I know I spent some time with Sarah in Seoul last year, and just, the Korean market is amazing. It's so creative, and there's so much opportunity there. So I think this will be the next opportunity, I think, for perfumers to actually look at different cultures and different expressions of perfume through these different cultural backgrounds. Is there a question at the front? Yeah.
Hello.
Hello.
This is not a question, just to add to what has
Yeah.
been asked. I think I don't know where to look. I think we have a perfect example of a new niche fragrance brand, going back to that question asked if there's ever room.
Yeah.
And personally, I'm a founder of a new niche fragrance brand that has only been in the market for 1 month. We launched in the UAE, and just to show you how there's always room for new niche fragrance, tell me if you've ever seen a bottle like this before. This is an extrait de parfum. The brand's name is Idman, and there's always room for more creativity, just something to keep in mind.
Congratulations too. Yeah, amazing. And you know, that's the other thing that I've noticed as well. Yeah, next question there. Is that when we're talking about finance and those 5 cherries, is that you might see a brand, you might think, I don't think, you know, I'm going to see them next year. But all it takes is for an injection from someone from a financial background or an institution that sees promise in that brand, and then you see them sort of reinvent themselves the next year or the year after. So you can sort of never really, as I said, it's sort of more like points on a ladder, how niche evolves, rather than is this a good brand or is it, you know, going to die? It's not so binary, I think.
Hi, over here.
Oh, hello.
You mentioned how, in response to the increased cost of living, that brands are producing more extracts because of the perceived value. And my question is there actually more value in an extrait, or is it really just marketing and perceived value?
Oh, that's a hard question, right? And I'm not sure that I'm the best person to ask that, because for me, it's sort of, you know, if a consumer sees value in something, whether that's because the brand has convinced them or the marketing's convinced them, then the value is perceived and it's valid. So it's sort of never for us to sort of say, I guess, you know, does this hold the value? But there's, you know, and it's a complex thing for me as well, because price is so much dictated by the retailer as well. And, you know, prices are set. If one brand puts their prices up, then the other brand has to say, okay, we're competing with this brand, so we sort of have to be perceived as having the same value. So there's sort of lots of points, and sometimes the snake is eating its tail. But it's a complex thing. But I hope that gives you some answer. There was someone, I think, yes.
Thank you for this great presentation. Mahdi here. I'm representing a fragrance house from Germany called Dulberg. I saw that the whole presentation revolves around trends. And the question is, how are trends being set at the moment? You know, because it's becoming very exhausting for us as fragrance house to catch up with trends.
Yeah.
And we really don't know where does the trend start for. Is it in TikTok? Or is it on like the creativity of perfumers? Or where does it start? And how do you capture it on your platform?
Yeah. It's, again, a great question, because I think, similar to the last question, there's such complexity here where some trends will start on TikTok. I remember meeting Francis Kojian, and he was releasing, it was at the launch of Aqua Celestia, and he said, oh, and I've also done this thing, it's kind of Baccarat Rouge, it's, you know, he didn't think it was a big deal. And then now TikTok has sort of made it a big deal. So I think there are some times where the industry is surprised by, and it's really the consumer. Michael Edwards as well will always say that it's the consumer that decides what's a legend, it's not the industry. But then there are, you know, plenty of other influences. I think raw material producers, if they're going to invest, you know, millions of dollars in, say, producing tuberose, they need a place for that tuberose to go. So they're going to obviously work with companies to sort of influence people to go, yeah, we want to wear white florals this summer. So I think there's multiple influences. I don't think there's always one place where a trend starts. But I think niche is always a really interesting nursery for these trends, because it is a small, agile business model where things can be tested, and if they don't work, you know, it's not like a huge multi-billion-dollar launch where the money just goes down the drain. They kind of go, okay, well, let's pivot. That didn't quite work. We can adjust. So I think niche is always a really amazing nursery for new ideas. Any other questions or comments? Anyone has anything they want to add?
Hi.
Hello.
I'm Arthur from
Hey, Arthur.
Barcelona. I just have a little question regarding the market itself. You said that was the first time we've seen the drop in the niche market. There's also a little like a comment that happened just before the event. There was a partnership with the Born to Stand Out and L'Oreal. So my question is that a sign we're getting to the red ocean, peak of the red ocean? I mean, if you're referring to the Red Ocean, Blue Ocean strategy, so we see that there is a little drop because oversaturated market of the niche. So is that the sign we're looking into it? Because for the first time we see it.
It's I think I'd be more comfortable commenting on that if we didn't have COVID, because I think COVID really upset the curve. And so I don't know if it's something that we're seeing as a result of the industry sort of flattening out when it comes to niche, or if we're still sort of finding our balance after having a rocky few years with COVID. And it's a conversation I've been having with a lot of brands and retailers as we're meeting, through this week and previous trade shows. But I don't think we're there yet. I think there's still a way to go. And again, as we're seeing, I think a testimony to the health of the industry is seeing companies like Kering and L'Oreal, buying and investing in niche brands. I think this is a sign that they, and with all of their expertise, know that there's still a way to go. So I think that might be a good sign. Any other questions or comments? No? Okay. Well, thank you so much for, again, spending your time at Essence. I know time is value, so thank you for spending it with me. If you have any questions, please let me know. Thanks.